Hello and welcome back to Module 2, Lesson 2. And in this lesson, we're going to talk a bit about business setup. So, what we're going to cover, we're going to talk about getting the right advice. That's really important. We're going to talk a bit about structures for your business. We're going to talk about accounting and tax. We'll touch upon insurance and legal agreements, and we're going to also talk about keeping it simple, which has been a pretty consistent theme of what we're talking about in our lessons in this course. Always think it's important to keep it as simple as possible so you can get started, and then, of course, you can build on things as you go. Okay, so I wanted to talk a bit about getting the right advice. So, structuring entities and that tax and that kind of thing isn't my area of expertise. So, whenever I am starting a business or I am doing anything to do with tax, I speak to my accountant and get advice around what's the best thing to do. And it's different for everyone depending on your circumstances as to what kind of arrangement you should have. So I think it's definitely worth your while taking some time to talk to your accountant. And if you haven't got an accountant, to find one and have a bit of a chat about what the best way is to structure your business. For many people, it might be absolutely fine just being a sole trader. So that's just working and invoicing under your own name. For some of you, it might be better for you to set up a company to work from. So definitely it's worthwhile getting the advice to check that there's tax implications often of the structure you run your business through. So for some of you, it might be better to have it set up differently to the way I did my freelance work. And I've had a couple of different jobs, one of which it was better to set up a company, and we did that through the advice of our accountant. She was able to help us get that set up in the right way. And that's kind of the same in terms of the accounting and tax side of things. So you want to make sure you get it right, so you don't end up having any nasty surprises when it comes to tax time. Again, depending on the structure you've got and the way you're doing things, there can be quite a lot of different things to take into consideration. So there's tax, but also there's just your regular tax that comes off your income. But then there's lots of other things to take into consideration. In New Zealand, we've got things like ACC levies if you're self-employed, and then lots of other things depending on your situation. So talk to your accountant, make sure you're really clear about what your obligations are in terms of tax, and then it'll make things a lot easier and a lot less stressful, because the last thing you want to do is find out down the track that you have a nasty tax bill that you weren't expecting. So get the right advice. One thing I always recommend to people as well, in terms of just your accounting and tax, and your accountant will tell you this too, is just to make sure that you put aside enough money to pay your tax bill. So a lot of the time we'll be invoicing our clients directly and then they pay us, but there's a tax component of that. And in some cases, you might also have a GST component of that. So you need to make sure that that money is put aside, because ultimately that's not really your money. So you need to make sure you've got that saved to pay to the tax person at the end of the year, because there's nothing more stressful than getting to the end of the year, the tax year, and finding out that you've got thousands of dollars that you need to pay to the tax man or lady. And you don't have that money to pay it at that time, and then you end up with penalties and that kind of thing. So just make sure you get the right advice around that so that you know what you need to do. So the next thing I've got in there as well is insurance. Again, insurance isn't my area of expertise. And so when it comes to insurance, I have an insurance broker who helps me with insurance. So I think it's a good idea, again, if you've got an insurance broker, or you can get in touch with an insurance broker to talk to them and find out if there are any sorts of insurances you need to have for your business. In some cases, it's good to have some sort of an indemnity policy in place, just to make sure that if anything goes wrong, you've got some protection there to cover you for any liability that you might have to your clients as a result of your work. In some cases, it might be that the organizations that you work for have insurance to cover you. That was the case in relation to a couple of the jobs that I did. I was working as a contractor, and the companies that I was working for had a policy that covered me working for them as a contractor for the work that I was doing. So you can check that out and see if that's the case. But in a lot of cases, it might be that it's better for you to actually have your own policy to protect you in the event that anything does go wrong. And I don't like to think about that. It's better to be safe than sorry. And often those liability type policies, you can get a amount of cover that is relatively inexpensive. So for the peace of mind, it can be worthwhile having that in place. And then the other thing that I've got there is legal agreements. Now, again, even though I'm a lawyer, writing up contracts for these kind of things isn't really my expertise. There is quite a lot of information online. You can find there are some quite good templates for different legal agreements. I've used those before for different things that we've done. It'll be different depending on where you are in the world as to what kind of clauses and things that you need to have in your legal agreements. But I've found that there are quite a few good legal templates online. And again, it can be a good idea to get your lawyer to have a look at something. So you might be able to find some really good templates for freelance work online. And you could put something together and then take that to your lawyer and get them to have a look at it. Normally, something like that wouldn't cost a huge amount of money to get it done. And it certainly is likely to cost you less in the long run than if something goes wrong. So it might be possible for you to have a fairly simple agreement written up that sets out some basic terms and conditions about things like when you will be paid, confidentiality potentially, things to protect your client and to protect you. And, the ideal thing really would be to have something set up so that it was just a basic template that each time you have a new client come, you can just fill in the dates and the client's name and that kind of thing and just alter it as you go and with each different client. So definitely something I think it's worth having in mind to give you a really clear idea about what the rights and obligations are between you and your customers. And I think it's quite helpful too. I mean, the formality of having a written document, even if it's only like a one-page type document, it helps to keep everybody's mind in the right place, and it gives you something to refer back to too if there are ever any questions over when you should be paid or what you should be paid for. If you've got that set out in writing, then it's a lot easier than sort of trying to have to go back and look through emails as to what was agreed and that kind of thing and try and figure it all out after the fact. It's good to have it in writing in the first place. So those are 4 things that I think it's worth taking the time to talk to the experts about and to get yourself the right advice from the outset. And again, generally, those things, even though there will be some expense to them, aren't likely to be huge expenses. There's a lot of people out there, a lot of lawyers, a lot of accountants who work on a lot of small business work. And so hopefully have the kinds of skills and information that mean that it won't take you too long and therefore be too expensive to get those things set up. And then just a reminder to keep things simple. So all of these things, all these contracts and insurances and things can sound scary and expensive, but often they're not. Often it can be fairly simple and not overly expensive, but it can be really expensive if you get it wrong. So I always think that it's probably better to spend $500 to get some advice from a lawyer on the template contracts that you want to use, rather than waiting and then later on having to pay $5,000 because you have a dispute with a client and it ends up having to go to some sort of legal process. I also want to say too, some of this stuff might sound scary, and I guess it can be if it goes wrong, but the idea is that you have the right things in place so that it doesn't end up being scary if it does go wrong. So I don't want you to think that you should be put off by these things, because I don't think you should be. But like anything, it's about having the right advice and talking to the right people and finding out what you should do and the costs of doing that. And if it's going to be too expensive to do the perfect thing, then see if there's something you could do to keep the costs down. Like I said, maybe you could do the first draft of a contract that your lawyer can just review rather than getting them to write up the whole thing. Or when it comes to accounting, maybe you can do your own tax return. Maybe you've got the knowledge to be able to do that, so you don't have to spend quite as much on the accountant. Things like, Xero or MYOB accounting softwares, they make it easier for you to do your accounting, and they make it potentially easier, I guess, for your accountant. But there's a cost to those things. So, maybe if you haven't got a lot of work at the outset, you might be able to save yourself some money on just having a basic spreadsheet that you use to track your spending and your expenses and your invoices, things like that, just to keep the costs down and make it really simple. So figure out what the basics are that you need to get started. Keep it as simple as possible. Don't stress about it all. And I think you'll find that actually it's not as scary as it sounds, and that for, a few $100s, you can get some really good advice just to get yourself set up right from the outset and make sure that you don't run into any problems down the track. So action station, make an appointment to talk to an accountant and get some advice around the structure for your business. Like I said, that might be relatively simple for you, depending on your circumstances. And if you don't have an accountant that then you could jump into one of your local business groups online, Facebook groups, that kind of thing, and ask for a recommendation or ask a friend, see if you can find an accountant, particularly one who helps people set up their business structures. A good idea also to make an appointment to speak to an insurance advisor. In many cases, this actually won't cost you anything. So you can just talk to them. They can give you some quotes and advise you on some different policies that might be available. And then you can have a look and see what is available that fits into your price range. And then also, depending on the kind of work you're doing, you might find that clients have some level of cover to cover you for jobs that you're doing as well. And then finally, you might also want to make an appointment to speak to a lawyer and just get some advice around the contractual side of working with clients. So just seeing whether there's any sort of a template you can use, something but quite basic that you can use as a template to create a client agreement that you can use for your work. All right, so that is that for that part of the course. And then we're going to move next into Module 2, Lesson 3, where we're going to talk about pricing.